Welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. I'm Steve Gibson.
I'm Ben Matlock.
And it's been a long week, but we're here.
Yeah, we fuck, dude. Fuck.
And I mean that like on a global scale too, because like I won't get into either of our stuff because that's not important. It's not part of the show. It's not entertaining.
It's not fun.
But it's not just that. It's like everybody I know is going through their own like just shit list of like thing after thing, and then like the global.
Yeah,
like daily news on top of it.
This is a weird time of the year, and by the time people hear this, it'll already have come and gone. But like, it feels like life is just overwhelming for a lot of people right now, us included. And the whole time this is going on, there's just this like backdrop of like corporations and shit being like, "Remember to go grilling this 4th of July." And I'm like, man, fuck off. Like, maybe I'll grill, but like, you know.
Not because you told me to. I was going to do it anyway.
Maybe, but it's also 110 degrees where I live. So,
well, advantage
maybe
of
I
that,
won't.
You don't have to buy charcoal or gas. You just fucking hold your hand out the window with a hot dog in it.
I just bought a new truck. I can throw the patties on that, and it'll be fine.
That's the thing that's interesting with all the stuff going on in this weekend. We'll celebrate. There's a couple things. There's. Of course, like you said, it'll be over by the time this airs, but the 4th of July, which, you know, whatever. I'm mostly excited for that because I get an extra day off work this weekend. So
lucky you. I get an extra day of work.
Of work, yeah. That's where my day goes. They said give it to Ben, but it's my brother's birthday. His birthday's the 3rd, so we always celebrate, you know, around the same time. And then the Columbus Crew, who I'm a big fan of, their new stadium opens on the 3rd. And with a home game, their first home game at the new stadium. So there's a lot of stuff to be excited about this weekend, but man, it's been a fucking week.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's put those worries, those stresses behind us. If nothing, for maybe just, you know, half an hour
between
to
us,
an hour.
underneath us, on top of us, behind. Just put them somewhere.
Bury it deep in the walls, so that
let
no
the
one
next homeowners find it.
As soon as they try to remodel, leave a little surprise for those fuckers. You'll be out in the fucking woods in Alaska somewhere. They'll never find you by the time they uncover all those stresses and worries.
Hey, honey, there's something in the wall. Fuck, it's stress.
I'm overwhelmed. We're trying to remodel, and now I have all his problems.
In fairness, that's exactly how I've always felt every time I've had to do a remodeling project. Like,
yeah.
I had to and it wasn't even like just a cosmetic, we want to redo our bathroom at our old house. It was like massive water damage from a leaking shower behind the wall. And so I had to like tear out the shower and the walls and everything. And it was literally just like studs and dust and then you
because nobody ever gets anything fixed in their house. So if you buy a house, you get all the problems of the house.
Yeah.
That came before you buying it.
These problems started before we bought it, but we were aware of them well before I decided I need to do something about it for the same reason. Because it's like, this is expensive. I don't know how expensive it's going to be. It could be a major thing. So I'm just going to ignore it. And then it gets to the point where you're like, yeah, I can't ignore it anymore. And then you get to the point where, and we only had one bathroom in that other house. So you rip it up. And I remember that it was a Friday night. I got home and it was like fuck it, this has to be done. I was just in one of those moods like we were talking about off air where you're just not in a great mood, but you're like, I need to be productive. It's the weekend. This shitty week's behind me. And so for that Friday night, we didn't have Lincoln yet. I just started fucking tearing walls out. And by like midnight, you know, I had it all torn out and relatively cleaned up.
That actually sounds oddly therapeutic. But that's just where my head is at right now.
It is until it's done. I'll tell you, I slept maybe an hour that night because once it's done, then it's, am I going to be able to fix this? Like, cause I am not a handy person. And it's like, how much is it going to cost me?
In the moment, you're so fucking confident of like, time to get started on this shit. And then afterwards it's like, I might have just destroyed my house.
The good news was it took us months to get the bathroom back, like altogether. But by the end of the next day, or at least the end of the weekend, I had the shower, like the walls put back up, and there was a lot of fucking work there because
I feel like I must have. Usually you post photos of when your handiwork is done, and I usually take the photos and I Photoshop a crazy crab into like the window or something just to freak you out. And
I probably didn't post photos because even the finished product was still pretty embarrassing.
If you can find one, like, post it so I can get like the crazy crab peeking behind a shower curtain. I think that would really be fun for everyone.
My whole point is if you added extra stress behind those walls, someone like me, I would have just keeled over dead, I think.
I just imagine
but that was a weird conversation to start our show with.
Yeah, it's a weird week where we spend an hour venting, which normally it doesn't take that long, just to make sure we were equipped to do this show for you guys with the sunny disposition you've come to expect.
Hey, folks, we're here and happy.
But yeah, if you've never listened to the show before, we tell each other stories. Last week I talked a lot about a fucking horrible volcano that kept doing horrible things to a little town. So that kind of tells you we don't really have a structure for this shit. The stories can be about anything. And this week it's Steve's turn.
Oh shit! I thought it was your turn. No. Yeah, this one's kind of a little different. I've done this topic before, but it's not one that we do all the time. So I was kind of happy to come across it. But this week I'm going to look at a couple of famous, but not too famous, well-known legendary missing treasures. I'm a big, I've talked about it before on the show and on our past show. But one of my guilty pleasures is like watching these
treasure hunting.
Yeah, not actually hunting. Doing it because I don't have. It's one of those things that I should hate because it's one of those things that the only people that usually can do it are people that are already rich because it costs a lot.
Because you have a lot of time
and travel and equipment and all sorts of shit. And I don't have any of that, so I don't do treasure hunting. But I love watching like The Curse of Oak Island. It's the dumbest show. Like it's 1,000% a guilty pleasure to me, but I love it. And there's been a number of them. Some are still on, some aren't. Some of them strike a chord with me better than others. But I do. I love the idea of treasure hunting. Mostly because a lot of these treasures are kind of absurd. Because my thing has always been, we've talked a lot about pirates. None of these today are pirate treasures, but it's
every
the classic,
treasure can be a pirate treasure if a pirate finds it.
Well, that's true. But it's that classic thing that I always go to is like, oh, well, they buried their treasure, but then they never went back and got it. It's like, but they didn't bury it by themselves. Somebody knew where it was.
And they're dead
I bet
now.
you somebody. Yeah. But anyway, so my whole point is I like this topic. I don't know why I haven't done it more. So the first treasure is the tomb of Genghis Khan. And so he died around 1227. And most of us know who Genghis Khan is, and he's kind of mostly known as the bloodthirsty Mongol ruler who founded the Khan dynasty while spreading like death and devastation across enormous swaths of Asia and
One
Europe.
thing I will say is like he got that rep because he was attacking white empires that were doing the same shit.
Exactly. And that's the thing.
I was just watching a video about Genghis Khan the other day. And it was like a 20 minute, 30 minute, the channel's called Biographics, and it's a pretty interesting, like, little bite-sized history channel that's really easy to watch and tells these stories. And it's like, he was only bloodthirsty in the sense that everyone was bloodthirsty back then. And
and that's where
he went after fucking everyone.
And the thing is, he's been attributed, the numbers wildly vary, but on this low end that he was responsible for the deaths of as many as 6 million civilians, either through like direct slaughter, because that was one of their methods. They'd ride into town and they'd just pillage and kill.
Yeah.
But that also includes, because the other thing is you take over a territory and you take the resources for yourself. So a lot of people ended up dying of like famine and poverty and that kind of thing. But it goes up to some people estimated as high as 40 million.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to say.
It's just
I'm not
war. It's just like,
he's bad, but war is bad, I mean,
and there when the whole ecosystem, like of humanity at that time was built around war, and he was a monster, but it was
and I took it out because I couldn't word it right, but you let it into it naturally, so thank you there. There are groups of people, even today, that don't view him as a bloodthirsty villain. To them, he was kind of a hero, because like most history, it really depends on what side of it you were on.
Right.
And like you said, it is one of those things, too, where you could say, well, again, I'm not going to excuse murdering 6 million civilians, but at the same time, if he didn't do it, his people would have been murdered by somebody else doing it.
Right.
So,
it's kind of like, modern day, like, America, you'll see like shit on the news of like, oh, this horrible dictator committed these war crimes, as we're committing like 5 war crimes in that moment. Right. It's like, I'm not saying that war crimes aren't being committed by them. I'm just saying, at a certain point, it's like if everybody's doing it, this is just history written by the winners. Bullshit.
Well, like I say, the simple fact is whether they're bad or good depends on what side of it you were on.
Yeah.
And if you benefited from it or if you got murdered by it.
Yeah.
So anyway, other than the massive expansion, he was one of the, and in fact, he might have been, I think territory-wise, I think what I read is not necessarily by the end of his, because it wasn't just Genghis Khan. He was extremely successful. A lot of territories conquered, a lot of whatever. But he, like I said, he founded the Khan dynasty, and his successors went on to continue that. And I know that by the end of it, the amount of territory that they had taken over is the most that any one, group has ever controlled. So he was very successful there. But on top of, the notoriety or the fame or the infamy or whatever that gets you, and the territories that get you, it gets you a shitload of stuff. Yeah. You get a lot of wealth from that, because you tend to be, not too many people in those positions are like conquering and saying, but keep your resources, because then they just turn around and.
Yeah, I mean, war. It's like war has always been a business,
Right.
And like, you can say like, yeah, maybe they loved combat and maybe they loved killing and shit and all that side of it, but territory, all that crap, those are money moves, like that's what I mean. Is like, it was kind of the first fucking business for all these empires was like, they weren't trying to get ahead by growing corn, they were trying to take your shit.
Yeah. Well, hell, sometimes your shit was corn, but it always boils down to you have something, some resource that they want.
Yeah, but, they weren't growing their own corn. They saw you had corn, and it's like, that would be worth a lot in my pocket.
Right.
Pocket corn.
So he had a whole lot of wealth that he had collected over his successful campaigns, and a lot of it, I think, just kind of stayed in his dynasty, was passed down through his family. But a lot of it was taken to the grave with him, because that tends to be tradition when you're wealthy, that kind of wealthy, and from that kind of means.
A tradition that lasts to this day. Wealthy die and they keep it.
Yeah, they bury. But anyway, and this, a lot of these numbers, I'll say right up front, I think they're pulled out of people's asses. But estimates of, what he was buried with, the value of it are as much as 3.3, almost $3.5 billion in today's money. Although it could easily be more, it could easily be less, because we don't know what he was buried with. You're just kind of taking a wild stab at, well, this is how much wealth his kingdom had. Here's how much he probably, what percentage he probably took with him.
Here's how much we could, fit up various orifices. Simple
but
science.
According to legend, even death couldn't stop his brutality. Slaves, of course, were forced to build the lavish tomb high in the vast Khingan Mountains, or they dug it deep in the earth and planted a forest of trees on top of it, or they dug it deep in the earth and then diverted a nearby river to flow over top of it to protect it, because nobody really fucking knows. There's a whole bunch of different legends and tales of where it's at and what was done to hide it.
I would love if they just like cremated him and then made all that other shit up.
And that's a very real possibility, honestly.
Because they're like, that's a lot of fucking work, and he's dead now. He can't tell us what to do.
He wanted us to just bury all this gold? Fuck it, I'm keeping it. Like, what's he going to do? He's dead. And that's what I mean, too. That's a very realistic possibility, because a lot of these stories like hinge on the fact that people would carry out his orders after his death just to appease him, which maybe they would. It could go either way.
Yeah.
But nobody knows where he was buried, because the slaves that built the tomb were immediately killed afterwards so that they couldn't talk. And then the soldiers who killed the slaves returned home, and they were immediately slaughtered so they couldn't talk. So that's a real fuck you to those soldiers. But it's a smart move if you're trying to hide your tomb.
Yeah. But goddamn, how fucking stupid do you have to be like the soldiers that killed the slaves? Because it's like nobody can talk. And then you're like riding back home and nobody's like, hey, won't we be in trouble for knowing?
Yeah, but we were on their side. And honestly, you see a lot of that. That's the whole that meme about I voted for the Tiger Party. I didn't think it would bite my face off, or however that's worded. That type of deal.
Yeah.
It's exactly that type of deal. And presumably after they murdered the slaves and then murdered the slave murderers, anybody else that might know about where it is at was like, oh, I don't know. I forgot. I don't know what you're fucking talking about. Because at that point, you're like, I don't want to be murdered.
I bet there was probably like one guy writing back who was like, this isn't a good idea. We shouldn't go back. And the other guys are like, oh, shut up, you. So regardless of how much truth these legends hold, Genghis was surely, well, I guess not surely, like you said, they could have just cremated him or left him out for the buzzards to eat, but probably not. For some reason, just the name Genghis sounds like a Pokemon to me.
I think it sounds like one of those
like he would be the pre-evolution of Gengar.
I think it sounds like one of those Korean, or not necessarily Korean, really Mongolian, because he's Mongolian, but one of those Mongolian barbecue chains,
a very American Mongolian barbecue chain.
Right. Exactly.
Genghis Khan's Grill and Pub.
Regardless, like I say, he's probably buried somewhere. We don't know today because there's no historical record of the site, and there's no record of anybody ever finding it in the midterm.
I'll find it.
Well, there's a good chance it's out there. So if you want to find it, and if you have a shovel,
give me a fucking TV budget. We'll make a thing out of it. Well,
Hollywood. You've got to have a lot of time too, because really, as it stands, the only thing that's known is that he's probably buried in what's still present day Mongolia. But that spans about 604,000 square miles, much of which is sparsely populated, just wildlands, like mountains and forests. And
that might intimidate a fucking simpleton, but somebody with my kind of trust fund and free time on my hands, I am confident I can get that, man.
The funny thing is, in the course of writing this, I came across an article from 2015, so relatively recent, but still, 6 years ago, 5, 6, depending exactly when in 2015.
Lifetime ago.
But the article was talking about a specific group that's on the hunt. There's a lot of people, of course, looking for it, and there's a lot of people that looked for it over the years. Centuries, really. But the article was for, the New York Times or New York Post or something. And they were talking about how, they may be closer to finding it than we would ever imagined. And I'm like, oh, interesting. Maybe there's a clue that came up. And then so I'm skimming through it, and they're like, this group's using satellite imagery to look for caves that might be good candidates. I'm like, that's not fucking closer. Again, 604,000 square miles, and you're looking at satellites looking for caves.
Well, as if nobody thought to fly a plane over Mongolia and look down. Be like, oh, there he is.
They were talking about how they're kind of crowdsourcing they're asking people to
crowdfunding.
Fuck funding, sourcing. Oh yeah, like look through these basically, and my guess is I didn't read it, and it's probably just fucking Google Earth too. It's not like they have special satellites, and it's like if scour through it, and if you find a cave that looks suspicious, like maybe it's got, and it's like, but the whole point is they hid the cave. You're not going to find like there's no rich king in here carved outside the cave. Like, so that article's fucking ridiculous, like a lot of articles are.
I'd love if they did find it and found like the fucking quote treasure was like all just like wooden spoons and shit.
Or just like that cliche, like, in my dying breath, I want to leave you this treasure. All the riches in the world are nothing compared to the friends you made along the way. It's like, God damn
Love
it.
Genghis Khan. I love that. I love that. It's just like, I could leave you all the gold in the world, but the most important gift I leave you is my heart.
I spent $280 million on this search, you motherfucker.
I love if Genghis Khan fucking bankrupts some dude with just a fucking lame moral
the thing
platitude.
is, he probably already all these treasures have people that have like spent to ruin looking for him. So he probably already has that. But it takes it up a notch when they spin themselves to ruin and then actually find it, only to find out that there's nothing.
Only to find Genghis Khan was like a lovey-dovey douchebag. Like philosophizing.
They open his casket or mummy or whatever. I don't know what their burial traditions were. And he's like just giving the peace sign. He's laying there like, love, brother.
All they find is a fucking hookah. My greatest gift at all, my bubbler.
Inner peace.
Rest in peace, Genghis. We miss you.
So the second treasure is the treasure of Younganatis. I think is how it's Younganatis.
Younganatis. It's a good rapper.
Younganatis, yeah.
Younganatis.
Incan. I hate the term the Spanish conquests because I feel like using conquest almost like legitimizes it. It's what we just talked about, though. Like, it makes it feel like it was the conquest. They won over this wild lands, which is how they viewed it, but it is not at all what it actually was.
Yes.
They don't call it the Spanish genocide.
Which is what it was.
Actually was. So I don't love that term.
Yeah. I think conquest does sound brutal, and it's still, I agree with you that it's still kind of glazing over what actually did. It's brutal, but it's almost like heroically brutal. Well, it makes it sound like conquest makes it sound like two sides fought each other. And what really happened
which they
was
did, but fought each other over at neutral.
Steamrolled a total region and did fucking horrendous shit to the native population that was not prepared for a goddamn war of that scale. So
and for some reason, the Spanish conquests, specifically that phrase, I hate. But and I almost went into it in my notes, and I'm like, no, because then that kind of makes it sound like the American conquests weren't as bad. They're all of these are equal. There's you can't rank a genocide. I mean, they're all
like the American. Like, really, you got to just sum it all up as like the fucking genocide of like the Americas.
Right. But, and again, and that's no better or worse than the genocides in Africa or in India or in Asia or anywhere, really. I mean,
it is the history
colonialism is bad.
Yeah, it's the history of human imperialism.
But even before imperialism, like we just said, with fucking, Khan, and like you said, it wasn't Khan. It's not cool to roll into some place and murder everybody and say, this is ours now. So that's why.
You just summed it up in the most like hippy dippy way.
Yeah.
Hey man, that's not cool.
That's not cool. But anyway, I hate the term, but that's exactly where this treasure comes from, was that time period, the setting and time period.
Yeah.
So in 1532, the Incans under Emperor Atahualpa I don't. I think that's Atahualpa.
Hi,
Were defeated.
I'm Adam Wappa.
I'm usually like really like the Spanish, Latin America type spellings and pronunciations. I'm usually decent with. Incan is not. It's far enough away from that I can't.
Adam Wampa with the nightly
Adam
news.
Wampa. But they were defeated by the comparatively smaller forces of Francisco Pizarro.
Ah, yes, I've read about Pizarro. He's a real son of a bitch.
He's a piece of shit, and we're gonna get to that. And I love how, because a lot of the stuff that you read again is coming from our European descendants' history, and so they word it like that. They're like, "Oh, he was vastly outnumbered, but he was able to conquer them."
And through his cunning, yeah, so it was always...
Yeah, we're gonna get to how he conquered him, but it was, of course, accomplished through being a cowardly asshat. And this is a classic thing. In fact, I had a story not too long ago where part of it was this was involved, but he invited the emperor and his people to a feast and then opened fire on all the unarmed, Incan soldiers and captured Atahualpa. And I'm sorry, I know I'm butchering that. So it's like it's like, oh, he managed to like defeat him, overwhelming odds. It's like, yes, because he fucking lied and then murdered them like when they weren't looking.
Yeah.
Like, woo fucking who? Good job. You're a genius. But they captured Atahualpa. They didn't kill him. And the emperor promised that they would give the Spaniards entire rooms full of gold and silver in exchange for his release. And as a huge fan of gold and silver, Pizarro accepted the offer. So over the course of like months, all the kingdom's like riches were being brought in and given to the Spaniards as part of this ransom. But he could sense that for some weird reason, the Incan people, who again vastly outnumbered him, were pissed off at him and were on the verge of rebellion.
I don't think
it's like he just got
guys.
this. Yeah, he's got the sense. It's like I think they might try to kill me.
Every time I leave my house, they throw fruit and shit at me. Does that mean anything?
So, having received most of the ransom and realizing that his warm welcome had quickly worn out when he fucking murdered them and captured the emperor and then demanded all their stuff,
yeah.
Pizarro declared Atahualpa a heathen and condemned him to be burned at the stake. Because, of course, why not turn this into a like Christianity religious thing?
I mean, it's funny. It's funny that like Western civilizations are, have that like proud like don't negotiate with terrorists type thing. And it's like, and this is why, because we were fucking terrorists.
We know what'll happen if it doesn't work. But he wasn't a total asshole, so he gave the emperor the option to convert to Christianity. So thus he wouldn't be a heathen, and then they wouldn't have to burn him at the stake.
Like more of a total asshole. Like,
yeah, and I know we could get into. I won't, but I know. I consider myself Christian.
To hold somebody's life in your hand.
The funny thing is, to tell somebody become Christian or I'll kill you inherently isn't Christian, because Christianity is about believing in something and accepting it. Yeah. Being told you have to or you'll die is not that. Yeah. So inherently in Christianity, you can't do what he's doing, but they did it all the fucking time. To this day, people still do that. They try to force the religion on you, and inherently that's not how it works. But he told him, hey, I'm going to burn you at the stake. You're not a Christian. But if you become Christian, then I won't have to burn you at the stake because you're Christian.
Because we'll be cool, buddy. And you can give me more gold. Doesn't that sound fun?
Atahualpa kind of wanted to live. So he said, yeah, okay, I'll convert to Christianity. Yeah. So he agreed and he converted. And then Pizarro strangled him to death and scampered away with his loot. And presumably,
not great, but I would take that over being burned.
Sure. But that's still the asshole. It's like, well, I didn't burn him, like I said. Yeah. So our point is what we said at the beginning. Pizarro is a piece of shit.
Pizarro is such a fucking douchebag. Fucking like one of the biggest, like, slimiest fucks in history. I can't overstate that for people.
Like we said, even if you, like I said, the Spanish conquest gross. There's no way to say it's not gross. But then we go back to Khan and say, well, it depends on your perspective and this and that. It's like, no, he's a fucking coward and a slimy piece of crap.
That's and that is where like the real definition of like a conqueror is like, or in their case, I guess like conquistador. Like that's where it's like all fucking bullshit, because it's like you didn't like conquer them like you did. It wasn't like this military force strategically moving through a region and taking shit over. It was you completely, like, you pulled the shadiest shit on a vulnerable population.
Well, right. That's like me meeting with a car salesman because I want to buy a car. And so I say, well, I'll agree to meet with you to negotiate the price. He says, cool. And then he shows up and I shoot him in the face and take the car and then be like, look how good of a businessman I am.
What a good deal I got.
It was cunning. He didn't see it coming. It's like, well, no shit.
You'll have no idea how much I took off the Kelly Blue Book price with my expert negotiating tactics.
Right. So that's the equivalent of that.
And really it's like just that, like, it was something sadistic, and it's not unique to Pizarro, because we talked about like this happened in the entire colonization of the Americas. You could point to any empire, and the people at the forefront were like this, but there was a fucking sadism in it.
Well,
where you'd
and
like
part of it
dangle
goes
a carrot, you know.
Well, and part of it goes back to they didn't consider these people human beings. They considered them lesser, almost animals. So they didn't feel bad about the stuff that they were doing to him, because they're like, can you believe those barbarians fell for it? And it's like,
which is still fucking sadistic. Like it's
sure. I'd argue it's the ultimate sadistic. Like I think that makes it more sadistic because you're in an
inherently like advantageous position, like. Not in the way they thought, where they thought they were better than these people, but you did have the military grip that they could not counter. And like, just, you know, like I said, you know, to fuck with them and be like, oh, convert to Christianity. Well, and like shit
but
like that.
I would argue at this point, they didn't have the military grip. If anything, in this one singular, overall, obviously they did, because Spain and France and England, everybody just steamrolled all of the Americas. But in his individual situation, they were way outnumbered. If the Incans decided, hey, we don't want these people here, they could have slaughtered them all.
But that was the advantage, I would say, is that and it was the same in here in what became the United States, like. The tribes, if they were all together, we would have been fucking beaten off the goddamn coast. But they weren't. They were so divided that it was, you know. Yeah,
that was part of it. Is that the Inca Empire at this time was going through its own civil war, so they did have that going on.
Yeah.
But the other part of it is they kind of welcomed them, because they're like, oh, these new people, let's see what they're about. And it's like, oh, they're about murder and theft. Cool.
They're real bad. Fuck.
Whoops. Anyway,
don't go see them. They're fucking bad.
The whole point of this, though, was Pizarro saw things going to shit and took off with what he had, but he didn't have it all yet. There was one final shipment, rumored to be the largest, at 750 tons of gold, that hadn't reached him yet at the city. And the general delivering it got word that this Pizarro guy had just murdered the emperor and took off. And he's like, well, fuck that guy. I'm not delivering this gold. And that's where this treasure comes from. So somewhere in the mountains, or just there's this stretch of land, they kind of know where, because they know what route it was on. They decided, let's just bury this gold for now. And then they had other stuff to get to, because like we said, they're in the middle of a civil war, and all of a sudden Spain showed up and was like, hey, we're on the scene too. And in the ensuing conflicts, this general and basically all the Incas, because we know how history ended, Spain won and most of the Inca Empire was wiped out, which meant this treasure was out there. But again, like any good treasure story, the people that knew where it was died. There was nobody left to go back and claim it.
Yeah.
So that's the whole legend behind this. It would be in the mountains of what is now present-day Ecuador. But if you go searching for the treasure, be warned, a lot of people have gone searching for 750 tons of gold because that's an attractive prospect. Mm-hmm. It's apparently cursed. It's one of those fun treasures where there's all these stories about, well, they went looking for it and then their boat sank on the way home, or they went looking for it and then they mysteriously fell ill. It's like, I would call all those things exploring the wilds of Ecuador.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything weird about getting really sick going to another country and in the fucking
in an environment that's as dangerous as like rainforest and mountains and yeah,
there's nothing mysterious or cursed about diarrhea. It's very, if you follow my Twitter, you know diarrhea is very natural. It's nothing to be ashamed of.
That's what actually feeds most of the rivers down there. That's why the
rainforest bacteria that just dissolves your organs. Just embrace it, you know?
Fuck, I say down there, if you've ever seen the Mississippi, I'm pretty confident that's at least 60% diarrhea.
Yeah.
But anyway, I liked this one because, and clearly you have too, this first part, most treasure stories, it's really hard to suss out like how much of it's complete like fiction, how much of it isn't. And whether or not there's this actual treasure out there, of course, who knows? It could be all legends. But the first part is very, very real. I hadn't heard about the missing treasure before, or I hadn't remembered it. But I have heard of Pizarro before, and the Incan emperor, and the shit cannery that went down. So that's what I like about this one, is it does at least fold in actual history. Well, they all fold in some actual history, but a lot of this, that really happened. They really held him ransom. They really pillaged a bunch of gold, and then they really decided, let's murder him anyway.
Yeah. That's, the best legends you can find usually grounded in something true,
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of why I don't get into like those treasure hunting shows like you do, even though I like the topic. Because to me, it's like, I don't actually want anybody to find these things.
But that's why I like them, because if you watch these shows, these people on them, they're not going.
They're not going to find them. I know, but if like someone did, it would really suck. Because to me, it's like one of the few things I genuinely still like. I've always loved about this planet is all the little dark corners of it, all the like shit we don't know. And even as humanity comes to fill more and more of the map out, we will never totally know everything about this place. And like the mystery is the fun part to me.
For me, it's and this is going to sound cornily Indiana Jones, but it's the history behind it. It's the whole, it belongs in a museum. Because this kind of stuff, it makes it easier to forget about our history and overlook the shitty stuff like this whole chapter when you don't have it.
Yeah.
But what I hate about treasure hunting now is, it was a problem before and it's a problem now. They're just different problems. Before you'd find treasure, and in most places, in most cases, the treasure hunter was entitled to it because they're the ones that found it. And then all these countries realize, like, hey, this is a shit ton of money that we can just say that, well, we own the rights to it. And so now when you find treasure in almost 100% of the world, it has to get turned over to the government, which is considered the owner of it. And in this case, grossly enough, would probably be Spain.
Yeah.
Although you could argue it wasn't given to him, so it would go to, I don't know, Ecuador. It may default to where it's found. And the only problem with that is it would be great if it was going to these countries and ending up in a museum. And a lot of times it does, but a lot of it doesn't, because they want to use it as wealth too, just like you or me would want, to some extent. So that's the part I hate, is it doesn't get treated like archaeology should. It gets treated like, hey, I found money.
Yeah.
That's the only part of me that would make it okay. I agree with you. I like the mystery and I like it being out there, but I would also like answers to some stuff too. So that part would be satisfying. Yeah. But again, most of these treasures, I think you would find it, and it maybe was a real shipment, and they'd be like 750 tons of gold. And it turns out it was like one gold bust of a monkey, like taking a dump. You're like, But I would want that to be found.
That would be a good answer.
Yeah.
Like, if they just found a chest of some fucking coins or some shit, that would suck. But if they found a fucking... Well, why is this the most valuable thing the Incas had? It's just this statue of a monkey shitting in his hand.
Or again, that would be the irony of it. Like, the most valuable thing to them might have been... I'm not even going to hazard a guess, but say something that was very, very important to life in that
That's what
part
I was
of the
saying
world.
about, like, wooden spoons and shit with Genghis Khan. Like, something that's not worth any fucking thing to us, but it was like, nah, back in his day, that was the hot ticket item, you see?
Right.
I'm telling you, these wooden bowls, you're going to want them.
The irony of that, and at the time, they would have honestly thought they were handing over the most valuable thing, but it would have been... The Spanish would have looked at it like, what the fuck do we need wooden spoons for? Like,
I thought you guys had gold. It's like, why the fuck would we have gold? We live in the rainforest. We have diarrhea right now. How's gold
is what we gold is what we call wooden spoons in Incan. What were you talking about? Shiny metals? What do you...
Shiny metal.
I would say, what do you do with that? But now I'm falling into that trap where I'm making them sound... They were very advanced. That was what they used to justify a lot of this conquest. Is, they were just like cavemen, basically. It's like, no, they weren't. But anyway... Moving on to the third and final one, and these ended up in chronological order, but they also kind of this one definitely follows a pattern in its backstory. But from about 300 some years later. So after the French invaded Mexico in 1861, Napoleon appointed an Austrian named Ferdinand Maximilian to rule over the new territory, their little foothold. And this will get kind of funny here, funny in a whatever way. But arriving in 1864, Maximilian immediately declared himself the Emperor of Mexico, Maximilian I. And so from here on out, everywhere, I had to really actually dig to find his fucking first name, because he wanted to just be Maximilian I.
I've legally changed my name to King Shit of Mexico.
And it was one of those, he showed up, he says, I now rule Mexico. And of course, France was kind of behind him, because it was the whole like, this is our territory. We discovered it for France. Of course, Mexico already had a ruler in President Benito Juarez, who refused to recognize Maximilian's rule. So it's one of these, it's like, I am the Emperor of Mexico. And he's like, no, you're fucking not.
Yeah, you're just some French dude.
Yeah. And of course they were fighting about it. It wasn't just one of these like, we'll just ignore that.
I think if you can't answer 3 like geographical questions about the place you're trying to claim emperorship of, like, then you don't get to be emperor. Yeah.
So it was funny because it was just that all of a sudden France is like, we own Mexico, and Maximilian's the emperor, and Mexico's like, yeah, no, he's not.
We don't even have an emperor. You would know that if you were actually the emperor of Mexico. You would know there's no emperor here. There's a presidente.
But with the support of the French military, and Maximilian himself was a very successful like Navy captain or whatever. You know, he had a military career behind him, which is why Napoleon picked him. They did claim some ground, and while campaigning to be recognized as the official ruler of Mexico, and between like the French soldiers, and there were loyalists to him.
The way he keeps saying like, I'm the official ruler, sounds like those like beer ads, like the official Budweiser, the official beer of the NFL. Like,
it's
Budweiser,
like you're acknowledging
the
that there's
emperor
other
of Mexico.
Yeah, you're acknowledging that there's other rulers, but you're saying that you're the official one out of them all. Anyway, after the American Civil War ended and the United States was able to kind of regroup its military to focus elsewhere, they quote-unquote encouraged Napoleon to withdraw from Mexico. Basically, the United States officially recognized Juarez.
Hey, we're about to be fighting for that shit. Could you?
Yeah, kind of. That, but they supported. They were behind. They're like, no, this dude's the president of Mexico, not this Austrian guy that says he's an emperor. And they were supplying the favorite fucking tactic of the United States to this day, supplying arms to their quote unquote rebels. They
Hell
weren't
yeah,
really rebels
dude.
because
Da, 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 da. Happy 4th of July, guys. We've been doing this for hundreds of years.
Yeah, in this case, I would say they at least supported the right side, but like you said, for probably the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
But and I love how it was like, oh, they were supplying rebels, and the rebels were the people that already lived there up until France landed and said, "Nah, we rule it." I don't consider that rebels. I consider that occupants or whatever. I don't know what the word would be, but not rebels. But at the end of the day, Napoleon knew, he was waging his own wars overseas, and Mexico's not exactly close to France, and it really probably wasn't. It's like you want to gain ground, but at the time it wasn't that strategically important to him, and he knew that if America was going to side with the other guy, it just wasn't going to go well. He'd either have to divert a lot more attention to it or he'd lose. So eventually Napoleon ceded. He said, yeah, fine, we'll pull out. For what it's worth, I feel the United States gets more credit than it deserves here, because everything I read is like, with the United States urging, Napoleon finally, backed down and said, okay, we'll pull out. I could see that
a little bit, though, just because, like you said, it's like, it wouldn't be like if, Russia said, like, hey, get out of Mexico. Like, we were right there,
Yeah, so it was, and I'm not saying we didn't have a part in it, because that exactly was what it is. He's like, I can't win against Mexico and the United States. But my point is, he had his hands fucking full with Mexico to begin with. I just wanted to point out, I get a little bit of that gross, like, white knight feeling like we stepped in and saved Mexico, when I think that they would have had a pretty good fighting chance on their own, unless he decided to divert his full attention.
I can see the, like, if that were a head-to-head fight, I don't know. I can see the, like, global meta game kind of being played there of, like, if the United States gets involved, we might be kind of fucked.
Well, like I said, it would be
because that was the whole fucking drama of, like, World War II was, like, nobody wanted the United States to get involved, and the United States didn't want to get involved. And then apparently, like, Japan wanted us to get involved, and and then
or they just hated us that much, which, in fairness, we've plenty of reason to.
I think there were. I don't actually know that much about what led up to Pearl Harbor, but maybe it was like a case of, like, we were close to getting involved anyway, or maybe we already were. And
my understanding is there'd already actually been a couple of very minor skirmishes between the U.S. Navy and the Japanese Navy, so there was already some
it's
fighting there.
It's that thing of, like, if you're pointing guns at each other, at a certain point it doesn't matter if you say you're neutral, because at a certain point it's just like two sides pointing guns at each other. You're gonna fight.
And eventually one side's like, we better make this first move because we have a gun pointed in our face.
Right.
So whatever. But yeah. And that's the thing too. I would pretty confidently say if Napoleon in control of France and what he had conquered, I don't know I'm not a history buff, obviously. So I don't know where in the Napoleonic conquests he was at this specific point. But if he had devoted,
but definitely busy.
But if he had devoted himself, if he had decided France is going to take Mexico, I'm sure he could have overwhelmed them because they had the resource. They just had more resources. But that wasn't his goal. He was hoping that they could kind of ease their way in, and then he saw that wasn't going to happen, and he said, "Yeah, it's not worth it to me." Yeah. Emperor Maximilian, who along with his wife enjoyed a lavish lifestyle, in part over the last 3 years at the expense of the people that he helped subjugate, didn't want to give up his new kingdom and refused to leave. So basically, Napoleon's like, yeah, France is out. And he's like, I'm still fucking emperor.
And that is your first sign that you fucked up letting this guy call himself emperor. He's like that delusional. Like, we should have never told this guy he had power.
He did have still a number of loyalists. though many of them saw the futility of the situation and they fled, because most of them were French soldiers and some of them stuck around.
Yeah.
And I think it comes to that point where it's like the ones that felt special were like,
you realize this changes us as like we are no longer representatives of the French Empire, and now we are just some fucking crazy people
in the middle of Mexico, surrounded on all sides by people that don't want us here,
saying this is ours now.
But he did have some. And he did found a number of settlements for ex-Confederate soldiers who wished to move there and support him rather than stay in the United States. Because you can imagine a lot of people in the Confederacy after losing the Civil War were probably eager to just like get out of the United States for a number of reasons. But and some of them did move down there. So he did gain some support with Confederate soldiers who decided to become,
who apparently had a rich tradition of picking losing sides.
Right. But it was too little, too late, and even Maximilian saw the writing on the wall. So he had his wife and family leave for Austria while he stayed behind to settle his affairs. And by that I mean, of course, secure all the wealth that he had stolen. He wasn't going to just fucking up and like leave everything.
Fair enough.
So he loaded all of his wealth, which a lot of it, funny enough, was gold that he had taken and stamped into new coins that had the Mexican crest on one side and his face on the other.
Big old fucking nose.
Right. Because when you're emperor, the coinage should show you. But he loaded up a whole bunch of barrels with gold and whatever else that you have and sent it by wagon to Galveston, Texas, because he understood that, well, they probably wouldn't like him in America. They weren't going to actively kill him either because he didn't try to go and say that he owned the United States.
Oh, you know nothing about the United States, my friend. Yeah. If you come into our place with a fuck ton of gold and they find out about it, we'll be like, hey, he's coming right for us. Bang.
He may be clairvoyant here. So he had a number of his loyal troops escorting the treasure, but he needed more because it was going through, and again, I fucking hate saying it this way, but hostile Indian territory. And it's like, well, of course they're hostile. You've been killing them and taking their stuff. But anyway, he knew that it's like, yeah, we're traveling through this area where there's people that are probably going to try to kill us and take this treasure. So he needed more people. So he hired 6 additional Confederate soldiers to bolster the group. Unfortunately for him, at some point along the route, those soldiers figured out what was being transported. My guess is they were like camped one night and everybody got drunk and they were like, do you have any idea how much gold is in these here barrels? They're like, what? Like, yeah, they're full of gold. This guy is loaded and we're taking it to Texas.
Like glittering gold coins. Don't look inside.
These 18 wagons worth of more gold than you could ever even imagined in your life. That's what you got here. And they're like, oh, cool.
And it's so stupid because he probably could have followed his family with just like enough gold to be set for life.
Well, and his family in Austria was wealthy, so it wasn't like he was returning to nothing.
Yeah.
He was an archduke, or an archduke, I think that was, I don't know, whatever. He was some title that I've never in my life understood what it meant. But yeah, he was some form of royalty in Austria. So it wasn't, they weren't saying you've lost everything, go be a street urchin.
Yeah, you just don't get Mexico, you dick.
But anyway, these Confederate soldiers were like, oh, this is gold? And they're like, yeah. And they're like, cool. And they immediately murdered
Reach for the
all
sky.
of his men.
Yeah.
Yeah. But after murdering the soldiers, they realized that there was way too much treasure. The 6 of them weren't going to be able to transport it from Mexico to Galveston, Texas.
Where all of us know where this gold is, and we all have to die.
They seemed to be, it was enough gold that they were quite willing to share it, but they just knew they couldn't get it from where they were to where they wanted to be without also being attacked and killed.
Oh, man.
Because they had an ass ton of gold. So they hid it somewhere near the Horsehead Crossing in an area known as Castle Gap. One of the 6 soldiers, Bill Murdoch, soon fell ill and was unable to continue with the party. Instead, he remained at Fort Concho, which was about 400 miles west of Galveston, Texas, which I think is where they were still heading with it. Although I don't know. Once they murdered the soldiers, I don't know where their ultimate goal was to take it.
Yeah, it's damn it. I wish we won that fucking Civil War. Now we don't have a country to go to.
Okay. Well, this was enough gold to found our own country with as much slaves as we want.
If only we had land.
Yeah.
That is a predicament, though. They didn't feel comfortable in America, and if you brought that shit back to Mexico, Mexico was going to be like, give us our fucking money back.
These ones didn't necessarily flee. These ones were more mercenary variety soldiers. So it wasn't like they had nowhere to go in America. And I imagine even if you didn't feel comfortable because you just lost the war, you'd suddenly feel a lot fucking more comfortable when you had like
rolling in dollar bills.
Exactly. But anyway, so the one got ill. He couldn't continue on, but the rest did, which proved fortuitous for the one that fell ill because the other 5 got ambushed and murdered by Native Americans. Or at least that's who they pinned it. Again, a lot of times people would just get murdered and it was easy to be like, oh yeah, it was Indians that did it. And everybody's like, cool, let's look for them. Because a lot of this sounds really fucking fishy to me.
Everyone knows a white man wouldn't scalp someone.
And there's no way that this soldier who just turned around and murdered all these people that he was hired to work with would also turn on the other 5 soldiers in his group. And I, to be fair, I didn't read anything. I'm sure there's series out there because that's where my mind immediately went. I'm sure other people's did too, but I don't have any like thing to back that up. But it was just hella convenient that he was like, all this gold, they're murdered, they're out of the picture. You guys head on, I'm sick. Oh, you guys got murdered. Now I'm the sole survivor.
Yeah.
So his plan after finding out that the rest of the party had been murdered and supposedly he found out he got better and was continuing along the same route and he came across the bodies of the 5 men, which again to me is suspicious. And I'm not saying maybe Native Americans didn't kill him, but what I am saying is maybe he said, hey, get the word out that these guys have some gold. Oops, they got killed.
Yeah.
Who could have seen that coming?
There's a lot of ways this could have gone down and none of them are like on the up and up.
Right. But his plan after that was to go to Missouri to seek out Jesse James, yes, that one, and enlist the aid of him and his gang so that they could return and get the gold. Yeah.
If he did have those guys killed and then he went to Jesse James, he is the dumbest son of a bitch.
Well, but that screams amateur to me because that's the whole, like, everybody knows Jesse James, and we've talked about it before too. Like, he was this notorious outlaw, but he was also seen by most people as kind of this like folk hero. Like, people didn't want him murdering stuff, but at the same time, it's kind of that romanticization. It's same thing we talk about with pirates. Same thing we talk about with...
I mean, that's why when he died, everybody was like, "Oh, you're a coward, Robert Ford." It's like, it's like he was a fucking criminal.
And a murderous one. It wasn't just that he was a bad guy. It's like he murdered a lot of people.
Just because Brad Pitt made him seem really sad, it doesn't mean anything.
So that's the screams to me. This guy apparently had no ties to Jesse James. He never worked with him, but he's just like, this is right up his alley, and I'll be right in with the Jesse James gang, and this will be great. Unfortunately for him, along the way, he kind of met up with this other group on the road and was traveling with them. And they turned out to be horse thieves who also were being tracked by a posse or lawmen or whatever. And they got caught. But when they got caught, he was riding with them. And so everybody just assumed, like, he got arrested. They're like, you're part of this gang. And it's like, I'm not. And it's like, yeah, you fucking are. Old West, like, prove that you're not. So he got caught and thrown in jail. And this part kind of supports the first thing where he probably actually did get sick initially. And that's why he stayed behind. Because in jail, he was thrown in a dark, dank cell, and he got very, very ill again. And so a local physician was like sent to try to help him. And the physician's like, hey, look, what you got is really bad. You need to not be in a dark, dank cell. But they're not going to just fucking let you go because they feel bad because you're sick. So they brought in a lawyer to say, like, to help plead his case, to say, like, look, I am not a horse thief. Unfortunately, by the time all this went down, his condition got to the point where it was clear he was not going to live.
Yeah.
My guess is it was tuberculosis, because it
probably
sounds like a popular video game that we're both fans of that I won't say too much in case you want to play it. But that's exactly what it sounds like was tuberculosis, because it can come and go, but if you're in the wrong conditions, it goes downhill very fast.
Yeah.
So once he realized that he was not going to live, he supposedly gave the physician and the lawyer that were trying to help him a map. So apparently he had some like, hey, look, you guys tried to save me. There's otherwise it's just going to be forgotten out here. We murdered these dudes and there's gold. Here you go. And at this time in our history, apparently if you're handed a treasure map by somebody that just said they murdered somebody and they were trying to join Jesse James' gang, you go, I don't care that I'm a successful doctor. I'm going to go look for fucking treasure. Unfortunately, the area that they buried the treasure is like a kind of desert area where the sands shift and even the river itself kind of changes course from season to season. So they show up at this Castle Rock Gap or whatever I said it was called. And the map is fucking useless because nothing lines up with any of the landmarks on the map. And that's where we're at. So to this day, nobody has found this treasure that's supposed to be out there. Murdoch, of course, died in prison. They didn't find the treasure. And as for good old Emperor Maximilian himself, not that he would have known where the treasure was anyway, because at that point it had left his hands and then whatever.
He was officially robbed at that point.
Mm-hmm. But he also didn't make it out of Mexico because he was captured and executed for trying to, steal Mexico.
For the crime of trying to steal all of Mexico.
And then not even giving up when your country's like, my bad, we'll leave. And he's like, no, we won't.
I'll leave, but I'm taking the coins with my little face on them.
So he got what was coming to him. Although a funny anecdote that kind of fits right in line with how I'm picturing this douchebag being is when he was being about to be executed, he gave a gold coin to each of the people in the firing squad, asking them, he's like, here, I'll give you this gold I have. Please aim good and don't shoot me in the face.
Well, you can't do both, A good aim is to the face. And
that's a really grotesque, fun part about firing squad back then is,
I don't want a gut shot. I get you want to look good, but man.
They went it to the heart. They went somewhere that'll kill you relatively instantly. The problem is, no matter how good of a shot you were back then, you were shooting actual shot. They were handmade bullets that kind of whiz and move and don't go straight anyway. Yeah. They go kind of straight.
Well, don't get me wrong, man. I'll do my best, but this is going to hurt for at least 20 minutes.
Out of the 7 shots, or out of the 8 shooters, 7 of them veered off course and 1 hit him in the balls. It's like, son of a bitch, I gave you my gold.
One of them just takes the opportunity to do that curve the bullet shit and wanted, and hits him right in the nuts.
What can I tell you? I tried. He's like, I gave you my gold. And it's like, yep, and I'm keeping it. The story of that is like, they paid him, he paid him off. And so they gave him a gentleman's death by firing squad. It's like, well, unless that person personally raped and murdered your family, I'd hope if you're going to execute them, we've talked about our thoughts on capital, murder or offenses and execution. But if you're going to do it, at least you just kill the dude. But anyway, he didn't make it. None of the people in the escort party made it. The gold's somewhere in maybe Texas, maybe Mexico. I don't know where this area is because I didn't care to look. I think it's Texas.
I'm sure if it's in Texas that somebody found it.
People sure fucking look for it. To this day, all 3 of these treasures, the Genghis Khan one is less treasure hunters and more archaeologists, but there's treasure hunters involved because there's supposedly treasure. The other 2, there's a buttload of treasure hunters, from professional, whatever that would mean, to amateurs. A lot of people over the years, and I'm sure a lot of people have died and more have gone bankrupt looking for these treasures. But what's interesting to me is what we talked about. I love the stories. I love the idea that they may be there. I would love to have the means to waste my life looking for them because it's just fun to me. But there's a very, very real chance out of all 3 of these that none of them actually exist, or they did at one point and have been found over the years. Clearly, in our day and age, the smart thing if you find one of these treasures is not to say, hey, I found this treasure, because the government will swoop in and say, "Cool, it's ours."
Nice treasure. Here's a little Joe Biden pin.
Exactly. A write-up in the paper. We'll credit you with finding it, but we're taking it all. And you're like, fuck.
We'll have a
will you at least reimburse
nickel with your face on it in 50 years? And
are you going to at least reimburse me for my expenses? Good one.
Have you seen the national debt? Go lay down.
Well, but I mean, can't you just at least take my portion out of the goal? yeah, we could.
Did, and we did. This is us taking your portion out. We spent it all on this pen.
We're taxing you on the income that we took from you, too. Good luck, motherfucker.
Yeah. Also, you needed a permit. You're being fined.
If you can't tell, I'm a little bitter about these new, salvage rules. Most of these, I don't know. I think for a long, long time, treasure found in the ground supposed to go to whoever owns the land, which when you're talking about large swaths of wilderness, ownership of it's kind of bullshit to begin with, but whatever. But I know the salvage thing for shipwrecks, because those are the treasures that really do exist, because a lot of them weren't quote unquote treasures. They were loot that sunk en route back home. It's really out there somewhere, and we know it is, but it's just hard to find a ship at the bottom of the sea.
Yeah.
But it used to be, if you took the time and did the research and had the resources and found it, good for you, salvage. And now they're like, nah. And I'm bitter about that, because that takes a lot of the romantic adventure of treasure hunting for shipwrecks out of it.
Yeah.
But, and I think it's bullshit. I mean, there's, especially like I said, you find a Spanish galleon with that treasure, Spain gets to claim it. It's like, but it wasn't yours. You stole it from South America.
Yeah.
So like I said,
but I mean, that's why you have to steal it yourself. The game of treasure isn't trying to find treasure and legitimize it.
Well,
you find the treasure and you keep your fucking mouth shut.
I guess that's true. You don't say I found a Spanish galleon. You say I conquered a Spanish galleon. And then they're like, fuck.
Yeah. Finding treasure needs to be looked at as more akin to a heist than, a legitimate historical discovery. So.
Dun, 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 dun. But seriously, though, some of this treasure, and I don't necessarily mean 750 tons of gold in Ecuador or whatever, but even littler treasures, a lot of it gets found. And that's part of my complaint about these rules about ownership of it, because what that promotes is it gets sold on the black market.
Hell yeah, dude.
And then there's and I think given the rules, good for them, but it sucks because it completely destroys historical record. I mean,
fuck it. But the historical record's bastardized anyway.
So you're God, I can't even think of his name. You're that douchebag in the white fedora from Indiana Jones, and I'm the. And it makes sense because
no, you're like, it belongs in a museum. I'm like, what, a Spanish museum? Fuck them. Yeah.
Well,
why do they deserve it more than I do?
What a lot of people don't realize is that quote got truncated for time. The full quote is, it belongs in a museum in my den. My museum at home.
I'm saying, you're saying it belongs in a museum. I'm saying I'm a pirate, and and
that's not a bad idea. If I ever do find one of these treasures, I'll use a little bit of it to buy up a ship, and then I'll head to sea with it and be like, you can say it's yours. I'm in international waters.
Look, you're welcome to buy the fucking treasure off me. Is what I'm saying. You want to do dirty dealing, to get this thing in a legitimate museum, fine. But I have I'm a businessman, and my business is not very lucrative because I spend decades looking for Genghis Khan's stupid body. And now you're going to tell me I'm not going to get shit for it? Fuck that.
Or, I guess my other thing would be I didn't find Genghis Khan's tomb. I found Genghis Gibson's tomb. It's directly related to me. It's my family's fortune.
It's Genghis Khan's tomb. You ran a fucking pizza place.
This pizza will conquer your hunger. So that's what I got, Treasures. It was kind of random, but like I said, you can tell by how animated I was getting there. I really like the topic, and I
really like this one. This was maybe one of my favorites that you brought.
Well, it's nice to kind of get a break from. Not that I hate him, and I don't want to put him. We kind of do. We act like creepypastas and stuff are the cheap way out. But given what we've said about the way that our day-to-day lives are, I don't feel that that's a cheap way out. But it is nice to kind of.
I don't feel guilty about it anymore, but it is like the whole point of the show, the whole structure of it was when we originally came up with it was, to keep it give us a variety show where we aren't adhering to any one thing. And when you start falling into that rut, even if it's one I like creepypastas, it becomes
a creepypasta podcast.
It becomes, you become you feel a little bit one-dimensional, and it was why I enjoyed doing the volcano story last week, and it's why this one was a lot of fun.
I really liked that one because, I do like tales. I did a few that were a little different, but I like tales of, incredible survival.
I like that one because it combined that with, a lot of knowledge I didn't know about volcanoes and how dangerous they are and why they're so dangerous.
And that's exactly what I was going to say. Yours had that kind of similarity to that part, which I like those stories. But I love, like you said, just learning. That was really our impetus. At least we kind of came to the idea for this show at the same time. But I can't speak for which angle you were coming from. But I love stuff I like PBS Nova from the fact that I can watch it week to week. I record them and then 3 years later kind of go through a binge. But why I like it is it's a lot of knowledge about a lot of completely random things. So it's cool to me to I would have never learned about this if I specifically went out looking for it. So that was kind of weird. So that's why I like getting into these topics. But that's what I really liked about your topic last week. So if you guys didn't listen to it last week, I do encourage you to go back. It's got a little bit of everything, put it that way.
And this also combined a lot of what I enjoy from our history topics, which is I like history, especially when you kind of center it on specific figures. But this also had the mystery of lore and legend that can only come from treasure hunting. Yeah. So we gave you, basically I'm saying we gave you 2 really good episodes back to back. You could at least, be a little grateful.
Wow, that took a turn.
Just become the most bitter asshole. No, but these were fun episodes to do, and I think 2 for 2 means we can really half-ass it next week.
Next week, yeah. That's what I was going to say. I've got 2 really cool topics that I want to do, but they require work.
Stretch them out, Do one 3 months from now, and then do another 3 months from now, and we'll just fill the gaps with bullshit.
As busy as this week has been, and as much as we all know that I'm not, I say this week's busy, and people are like, but you only go every other week. We take turns with topics. It's yes, but I'm not going to do work in advance. That's
no,
stupid.
Day before. It's a process.
I was really on the brink of maybe I'll try to bullshit about, I don't fucking know, the Clippers playoff run because I could get you talking about that. So no, it's one of those. And then I was like, you know what? This is a topic I really like, and we haven't touched on it. So there's a lot of information out there.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's my process. It's a very professional one.
My process is if I don't have a show now, I'm just going to DM Steve and tell him no show this week. If I don't have an idea yet by Wednesday, if I'm not ready to go 24 hours before the show, it's probably not happening. But thankfully, there's a deep well of cop-out topics for me. So, but that's the show this week.
Yeah, when you don't limit yourself to a topic, there's endless topics. It's great.
Yeah, the internet. Thank you, internet, for letting me really just sort of half-ass this thing. But yeah, we're way over. So
yes,
and hope you guys all had a good 4th of July, and we'll fucking fuck off now.
Yeah.
Bye.
I hope you can still count to 10. Got all your fingers.
Yeah.
Which will sound like an asshole thing when one of our listeners blew off their hand, and they'll be like, "You son of a bitch, you're mocking me."
Through no fault of their own, too. Somebody fired a rocket at them. And
or it has nothing to do with fireworks. They were like using a weed whacker and the engine blew up or something.
Yeah.
But anyway, no, hope everybody had a good weekend, regardless of how much you celebrate the actual holiday. And we'll be back in a week.
Yeah.
Theoretically.
Well, we'll be back. Yeah, whenever.